Good evening, people. Welcome to the Twa Auld Heids with my old compadre Mike Fennick. And this evening we're going to be talking to Jim Fairlie, Farmers for Yes.
Jim, good evening. Welcome.
Hi, good evening. Good evening, guys. Thank you very much for having me.
You first caught my attention in an article in the National, and I said to Dave, this is a gentleman we've got to have on because he's looking at the independence question from an entirely different point of view than anyone else. And from my heart, the people that have watched these programs, Jim, will know that I keep going on about the people are sovereign, but we've yet to see the full exercise of that sovereignty and the power that actually holds. So I'm going to pass over to you, Jim. In your own words, let you explain exactly what's involved, and then I'll come back to you, or Dave will come back to you, and maybe ask you some questions. So the platform is yours, Jim Fairlie.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I'm surprised to hear you saying that you think I'm approaching independence in an entirely different way. I was brought up in a very nationalist household. The SNP was the party that our house talked about politics my entire life. It was always there. It was actually one of the reasons which I wanted nothing to do with politics, because it dominated so much of my childhood. And to me, there is no other way to look at independence other than sovereignty. It's you're either sovereign or you're not, and to me it's that simple. So when we got into the position where Boris Johnson was telling us that we had to, or the UK government were telling us that we had to ask for a Section 30, I said, well, why are we having to ask for anything? We're a sovereign nation. That's never been changed, so why are we not just doing it? And this idea kept on bouncing around in my head, but I've got faith in the leadership, and it'll come right in the end. There is a plan, it is going to develop. And after we lost the referendum in 2014, I was utterly heartbroken that as a country, we're the only country in the world that didn't take the opportunity to be an independent nation. And it absolutely broke my heart, and it took me a long, long time to recover from it. Because I always believed that if the Scots were given the question and were asked the question explicitly, do you want to be an independent country, that we would say yes. Even starting from the position where we were in the high 20s, I still believed we were going to do this. Of course we're going to do it. Why would you not want to be independent? So when we lost the referendum and we went through the 2015, 2016, the in-out EU referendum, it was something that I channeled in my farming background, that what will happen to Scotland as a nation if we vote no. The worst case scenario for me was if we voted no in 2014 and we had an in-out referendum in the EU, the farming community in Scotland would be decimated, because if we came out of the EU, the aftermath of that would be American trade deals, Australian trade deals, and they wouldn't get the support that you get from a European Union priority over the food and drink industry. Now, there's all sorts of arguments whether or not you should be part of the EU or not, but that was my reckoning at that time. So we were voted to come out of the EU in 2016, and this was supposed to be the game changer. And to me, it was still about independence. It was, right, okay, well, this is a material change in circumstances, so we now have to go for independence again, because this is a material change that they promised us, or they told us the only way to stay in the EU is to be part of the UK, so that was gone. And all the other promises that they made were gone. So therefore, we needed to do something about it. And yet this question, you need to get permission to have a Section 30, kept popping up. And I couldn't get my head around why they thought that this was a legitimate argument to make. And then we asked the question, and she says, now, Theresa May says, now is not the time. I think it's not your choice. It's not your decision to tell us now is not the time. Why are we asking the question in the first place? So there was a whole series of things that were happening, and I was one eye on what was happening with the independence movement, and one eye on getting on with my day-to-day life, farming and running our catering business and all the rest of it. And it became clear that we were in this treadmill of asking for a Section 30, being refused, and it didn't matter which Conservative leader that was going to be in Westminster, they just kept saying no, and we just kept accepting it. And I'm thinking, well, this isn't right. We're a sovereign nation. We shouldn't have to be asking permission from anyone. So I started to look at it a bit more closely, and I approached Joanna Cherry's, what would you call her, her senior staffer, and I said to them that there needs to be a way where we remind people that we are a sovereign nation, that we are a sovereign people, and that it's our decision to make. And I can't remember the response was, but yeah, we're looking at all of these things, it's all been spoken about and all the rest of it. But still nothing was happening. And I still have it in my head, well, the leadership know what they're doing, something is going to change. And I stood for the Auckland South Perthshire seat in 2019. John Nicholson put me to the post to get the nomination, and he's now the MP for Auckland South Perthshire. But during the questions, one of the panellists, or one of the people in the audience, asked the panel, what will be your first question to the Prime Minister in relation to what you're going to do for your constituents? Now you can see everybody in the panel went, ooh, how do you answer that on the hoof? But it was a fantastic question, and my answer was very simple. I would say to Boris Johnson, do you not know that the people of Scotland are sovereign? And there was a lull. There was a stunned sort of, hold on. And you could see the penny dropping. Ah, that's what he means. If you're sovereign, we don't need to ask you for a Section 30. And I left it at that. So this idea of sovereignty has always been there. It's always been first and foremost in my mind that if you're a sovereign nation, you don't need to ask anybody's permission. I wasn't seeing anything coming forward from likes of Joanna Cherry, taking the proroguing of Parliament to court and all the rest of it, thinking, right, okay, so you want to go down the legal route. Where is your direction? What are you actually trying to do? And then I witnessed the party, or sections of the party, booing Chris McElhenny when he was trying to get onto the floor to talk about his plan B. Now, I have a certain degree of sympathy for Pete Wishart's position that if you are going to ask the question, then ask it in a referendum. And I have to say, I personally agree with that. From the point of view that there are people who will vote for the SNP in Scotland at the moment who won't necessarily be convinced yet about independence, but they're prepared to vote for the SNP on the basis of they're seeing competent, good, strong governance.
Yeah.
So how do you keep them on board? How do you keep the guys who want to declare UDI on board? And how do you give the leadership comfort that they've got the backing of the people to do something that is bold? And it's going to have to be bold because Westminster will sit for the next 100 years and say, no, you're not getting a Section 30, because they've nothing to lose. They've got absolutely nothing to lose. So I was racking my brains thinking, well, how do we do this in a way that will keep all of these things together, but still be in a position where we can move forward without it being so precipitous as that it was going to damage the party, it was going to lose us a majority, and it was going to make our position even more difficult. So after an awful lot of juggling things in my head and talking to various people, I came up with the proposal that we go into this next election in May 2021 and we put it in the manifesto beforehand, and that's critical. It has to be in the manifesto so that the people know that this is what we're going to do in the event of us becoming a majority in 2021, is that we will take back control for constitutional affairs, because the constitutional affairs were lost to a certain extent in the 1998 Scotland Act, where Canon Kenyon Wright actually said afterwards that the regret that he has as the chair of the Constitutional Convention was that in the very first paragraph they talked about the sovereignty of the people of Scotland, but then allowed Westminster to insert that constitutional affairs are a reserved matter. Now, how they didn't see that coming is beyond me, but they didn't see it, and they've allowed constitutional affairs to be a reserved matter. So we've been in the position where we win election after election, we keep on winning majorities, and yet the UK government have a position where they can just simply say no. So as a sovereign country, how do we then exercise our sovereignty? We could, as Angus Brendan McNeill and Chris McElhaney have said, we go to the polls in this election and we say, if we win a majority in this election, we're going to declare our independence. Now that's a precipitative move for an awful lot of soft-nosed and people who are not yet convinced. So I still want the opportunity to be able to speak to these people and say to them, we've got everything here in Scotland that will convince you that as an independent nation, you're going to be better off, or that the best thing for this country is that we're going to be an independent nation. If you go down the election route, then you're tying it up with everything else. You're tying it up with education, health, and all the rest of it. And I think this is too big a question to have tied up in amongst the day-to-day running, because there are two separate entities here. There's the Scottish Government and there's the Scottish National Party. And the Scottish National Party, I don't care what anybody says, and I know I'll take criticism for this, we will not achieve independence without the Scottish National Party. It's as simple as that. They are going to be the vehicle that is going to get us to be an independent country. So we have to give everybody something that they can tag onto. And the approach that I'm taking, I think, is safe enough that nobody is going to feel as though they're either being left behind, they're either being ignored, or that they're going to be doing something that they're not comfortable with doing. Because ultimately what you're saying is, we will assume the responsibility for constitutional affairs. Now that's a tiny step in a manifesto, but it's a massive leap in terms of where you are as a nation. It changes the mindset of the people. It changes your ability to do things within your own country. And once you pull all of that together, if we win a majority in May 2021, we can call a referendum for Scottish independence the day after the general election. Now, I would hazard a guess that what will happen is, if we can get this into the manifesto, the Scottish Government will first of all go to the UK Government and say, we would like to have a Section 30. And if they say no, they say, well, we have assumed the responsibility for constitutional affairs. We're going to have a referendum with or without you. And that's where the boldness is going to have to come. And the leadership are going to have to take that by the horns and say, yeah, we're going to run with this. Because the other alternatives are, we sit and do what we're doing and continue to put pressure on and say, you have to give in at some point. Well, they don't. As it's just been pointed out to me by somebody else, Thatcher sat right through until John Major's premiership was ended without doing a thing, despite the fact that there were constant calls for the Scottish for devolution to be set up, and they just completely ignored it. Boris Johnson is the type of character who will do exactly the same thing. He will continue to ignore it. So if we go down this road where we're assuming the responsibility for constitutional affairs, it doesn't matter if Boris Johnson says no, because we will have the ability to hold that referendum anyway. It's not a precipitative move. The people who are not sure yet have still got time to make up their mind in a referendum. And the guys who want to absolutely declare independence on the basis of winning a majority may just be held together by the fact that they know that there is something else there in the event of the Section 30 being refused.
Jim, let me follow up on a couple of things and throw you, they're not curveballs, but the SNP conference, I think, well, I know is going to be a virtual conference, and I think it's October. There's been various dates, but I think it's now scheduled for October.
Yeah.
Chris McElhaney is going to try and get a resolution passed by conference. If I'm understanding you correctly, that's what you would want to try and achieve.
Mm-hmm.
When I waffle on about the sovereignty of the people, so there's my first problem. Can you get it? Can anyone get anything through? But I want to come at it from a slightly different way when we're talking about sovereignty. I'm going to use round figures. There's 4 million people in Scotland registered to vote. Half of them do, half of them don't, roughly. So that's down to 2 million people. We know a certain part of that. Let's not go into figures, but if you take the polls at the moment, it's 50-50. That's 1 million people who might vote yes. That's how it narrows down. But here's my tricky point. That 1 million people all want independence. If you've been on a march, Dave's been on a march, there's a chant. What do you want? There's no one shouting Section 30. They're all shouting independence. Yep. When do you want it? We want it now. Part of the reason for this, the programmes Dave and I are doing, is to say, right, how are we going to get it? Right? And listening to you. My worry is that, this is going to sound critical, but it's the best way I can put over the argument. That 1 million people are going to be dealt with by SNP groups who are going to have a big discussion about everything, including your proposal. And there's going to be a delegate chosen. And as you know, delegates can change their mind at the conference if they hear something that changes their mind. But what comes up as resolutions will be decided by slightly higher up and an even narrower number of people. And eventually, and this is where I'm not being critical when I use this phrase, eventually they come up against something called the gold standard, which is Nicola's description of Section 30. It's legal. It's what she asked Boris at the tail end of last year. Boris, can I have a Section 30? January, Boris says no, and the rest of it is exactly as you played out. That can go on ad infinitum. What worries me is in that narrowing down, it's a kind of pyramid structure, if you like. The sovereign people are at the bottom shouting, we want independence and we want it now. But it has to weave its way through all these bits and pieces and people and power struggles, etc. How do you react to that in terms of, that is my critique of sovereign people not exercising their sovereignty. They're passing it on to other people.
Yes, I absolutely take the point that you're making. But the only way that we're going to get it is, I'll talk to Chris, I'll talk to Angus Brendan, because there are bound to be other people out there in the country who are members of the SNP who are of the same mindset. We have to talk to each other. And we have to be saying, we need to get this put forward as a resolution, that the manifesto will state that there is going to be something, whether it's my idea, whether it's Angus Brendan's and Chris, whether it's their idea, whether it's something else that somebody else. The one that I would absolutely ward against is taking them to court. I don't want us to take them to court. And the reason I'm saying that is, as soon as you put the decision of the sovereignty of the people of Scotland into the hands of a court, you're giving up that sovereignty. Because the Supreme Court was set up by Blair specifically for the purpose where we are right now. And it scares me that we could be in a position where we've made this decision to go to court and the court rules against us. Where do we go from there?
So are you worried about Martin Keating's then? I
am worried about Martin Keating's position. If he wins it, great, but if he loses it, where does that put us?
See, the way I see that is as if Martin loses his case, it doesn't change anything at all as far as we're concerned, because at the end of the day, all it does is say that if we're going to have an agreement through Section 30 of the Scotland Act, then it has to be with the agreement at Westminster, and that's all they can do.
And then Westminster can sit there on their hands for the next 100 years and agree to nothing.
But it's still not the only way. It's still not the only way.
No.
The referendum bill that's going through. I know Mike's got some other stuff, but that's going through at the moment. As I say, like, referendums are not themselves reserved. So the thing is, the full option that Alex Salmond tried to do before 2014, or 2012, when they were negotiating all, Alex Salmond didn't have to actually go down the Section 30 route. He went down that route because it was safer, and it made everything nice and tiny. But at the time, there was talk at the time that it could still be done by the advisory.
Can I just chuck in a very quick comment and let you both respond to this? The Scotland Act is about the powers that were given to Holyrood, whether they were reserved or not.
Yeah.
The Scotland Act does not apply to Jim Fairlie as a sovereign Scot. It does not apply to Dave Llewellyn as a sovereign Scot. and it doesn't apply to Mike Fenwick.
Yeah.
Scotland Act does not restrict the powers of the sovereign people of Scotland in any way. It affects the Parliament, it affects the government, but sure as hell, I'm speaking as a sovereign Scot. Boris Johnson doesn't say no to me if I want to do something. I'm sorry. Sorry, Boris.
Yeah. Which brings me back to the point that I was making before. When we go to the polls in 2021, we say in the manifesto that if the Scottish Government want to do it, then they can do it on the premise of a Section 30. I'm not too fussed about that. But they say in the manifesto that by we will assume the responsibility for constitutional affairs as a direct result of the sovereign will of the people of Scotland. And it's the sovereign will that is the important bit.
Couldn't agree with you
Because
more.
I don't think Westminster will actually have the guts to challenge that. Because if you go back in history, in 1973, when they tried to change the council's position, they changed them from county councils to regional councils. Five council argued against it and said that they weren't going to do it. Now, everybody would have expected the Scottish office, I think it was Willie Hamilton at the time, the Labour Secretary of State for Scotland, everybody expected him to take Five Council to court. But the Queen wouldn't sign the papers in order to force them to do it. Now, why didn't she do it? Because she understood the sovereign will of the people as paramount in Scotland. So we're riding several horses here. One is that we're giving the government in Scotland comfort that we're behind them 100% in taking an action which we have told them we want them to do. By being in the bill that it's sovereign, Westminster will be very careful about challenging it. We're not doing the precipitous thing of running an election on the basis of we're going to be independent. So once you vote for the SNP in this election, next month we'll be independent and no discussion around it. So if we're reasserting the sovereign right, we are taking control of the constitutional affairs through the sovereign will of the people of Scotland. To me, it's answering all of the questions that are there and putting it into one nutshell. And if we do it that way, then nobody can come back at any later date. There is nobody that is going to come back with it and say that you haven't done this legally, that you haven't done this where there isn't a gold standard, because it's the sovereign will of the people of Scotland, and there's nothing more legitimate than the sovereign will.
Jim, you may not have seen the programme I did with Chris McElhenney, but I've raised it. There's a point at which, in the discussion, we said we need a common wording, a common phraseology, a common action. Doesn't just apply to the SNP. I'm trying to follow up on what you're saying. And Pat Lee from the Alliance for Independence was in the programme on Saturday. And I tested him in that. I said, if the SNP adopt a resolution along the lines you're talking about, Jim, would the Alliance for Independence follow that as a common way of achieving independence? And we talked broadly, Dave and I have done this, about would the Greens accept that? Would Solidarity accept that? i.e., so that when the votes are cast next May, each political party and every political party has adopted a common framework, so that if anyone's looking at it from the UK government point of view, how much are they challenging the sovereign will of the people who have directed the government to go down that road? And two, internationally, so that we domestic agenda between the Greens and the SNP and anyone else can be what it is. And I'm following what you're saying. That's why I said you're taking an approach to this that I identify with. That's a separate matter. That's to do with the government of Scotland. But on independence, if every political party in Scotland, I think you'll get an awful lot of backing. And in your discussions to get it through the resolution, it takes you away from the SNP 1 and 2 position as well. Because if everyone is signed up to an approach on independence, I come back to McCann. What do you want? Independence. When do you want it? Now. This is the way to achieve it.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you, I think you have read the article, Mike. I've specifically said in the article that it's the SNP and any other party who supports independence. If they all follow that same trajectory, what you're going to get is a common call from the people of Scotland who are all agreeing to the same thing. And it's, as I said, whether it's Angus Brendan's position or whether it's my position or somebody else comes up with something else, there has to be one thing that everybody's going to coalesce around. And that is that they've all got it in their manifestos, and it's not the SNP that the UK government are ignoring, it is the sovereign will. And the sovereign will, I think they are terrified to challenge. Now, it was actually, I had this conversation with my wife this morning, and she said, yeah, but the Scottish office not taking Fife Council to court because they wouldn't do something to become a regional council as opposed to a county council is one thing. What you're talking about here is independence. Surely they would see that as a much bigger issue, and therefore would take you to court in order to stop the Scottish government from taking the constitutional responsibilities from Westminster. And it is a bit of a gamble. But the gamble for the UK government is this: if they open up that can of worms, they're going all the way back to 1707.
Yep. And
so if they're going to go all the way back to 1707, they better have a hell of a lot of lawyers banked up to make sure that they're going to win that case, because everything falls around about their feet if they go all the way that back. They're more likely to say, we'll take our chances in the referendum because we can win a referendum by promising this, that, and the next thing. Mm-hmm. Let's change the leader, let's do whatever we can and take our chances with a referendum rather than challenging the sovereign will, because it's a much stronger thing for them to fight against than a one-off independence referendum.
Did you see?
On you go.
On Friday, there was a silly wee case up at the Court of Session about somebody that had bought a baronetcy, and he was trying to get a seat in the House of Lords through it, and the case was heard at the Court of Session, and it was nonsense. He was never going to get it, and it was overruled. But the judge in the case turned around and said that the Magna Carta has got absolutely no significance in Scotland. It's got nothing to do with it. And a complete nonsense case. It was a precedent that was set in stone like 4 days ago in a court, in the highest court in Scotland, which was basically the first time it's really been asserted since 1953. That particular ruling is going to have all sorts of fallbacks for the Henry VIII powers that are about to get used on us in January. It's opened up all sorts of nonsense. So I see what you're saying. Going back to what you said about Fife, the reason the Queen did not actually push that was because they were abolishing the third estate. Basically, the estates were guaranteed in the Treaty Union, and in abolishing that, they were basically they just completely crashed the original 1707 treaty, and that's why she couldn't take them when they said no.
Yeah.
Jim, when Chris McKelney was on, I became Dominic Cummings for a short while. I'm going to throw you the same, right? I'm going to throw you the same curveball that I gave Chris. So I'm sitting down with Boris, and I'm saying, Boris, we're going to lose Scotland. All the polls this year, one after the other, are getting them above 50%, and it's going to get higher. We've made an absolute mess of COVID, and everyone knows it, including half the English population. And Nicola's going to come back and ask you for a Section 30. You're going to lose Scotland, unless... Boris, I want you to say yes to the Section 30. I want you to say 100% yes. Best thing you could ever ask me, Nicola. Let's get this sorted out. Just do your usual, Boris. Go out there and say, yeah, I'm calling your bluff. Problem is, I'm going to impose at least 2 conditions. First one is a threshold. And I'll get the support of Labour, because Labour are tap hands at imposing thresholds which disturb Scotland. you're going to have to achieve at least 70% in the referendum. And see if you fail to achieve that, I don't want you coming back to my door ever again for a generation. It's off that. This is it. Section 30 you can have, achieve your threshold. If you fail, don't come back for 30 years. That's the danger I see in Section 30. It's not that you'll say no. It's the way we're building momentum at the moment. The great danger is you might just say yes. Could you react to that, Jim?
I think you're absolutely right. And as soon as they start putting conditions on our making our decisions, we walk away from it. We cannot accept a Section 30 on the basis of, yes, but we will put conditions on it and then you will not be able. It's not in Nicola Sturgeon's power to say that she will usurp the rights of the sovereign will of the people of Scotland. And that's effectively what Boris Johnson would be asking her to do. So she would be absolutely within her rights to say, that's not my decision to make. I can't tell you that there's not going to be another call for a referendum in 2 years' time because I'm not the people of Scotland. I'm representative of the Scottish Government right now. We want a Section 30. We don't accept your 70%. It'll be the same as the referendum that you won with 51%. It'll be if we get over 50%, that's it. And under no circumstances can I or any other leader tell you that we won't come back for 30 years because it's not our sovereign right. It's the people of Scotland's sovereign right.
I agree with you. I want you to, let me take it a stage further. When we did the first poll, we put up Plan A and Plan B, right? Unless you watch these videos, let's just call you, Jim, at the moment, Plan C, just so I've got letters in a row.
Right.
After the 2014 referendum, everyone's downhearted. I took no part in that beforehand. I decided to become committed because of it.
Right.
The thinking traditionally was we're going for another Section 30, right? 2015, 2016. Use the mandate, use the mandate, use the mandate. What is clear to me now, if you call that Plan A the gold standard, it's not going to survive. Anything which relies simply on a repetitive request for Section 30 is dead. It's Section 30. I don't necessarily agree with this, but it's Section 30 plus something and how you achieve the something that goes beyond it. Is that roughly where we are? Is Section 30, as it was conceived, Plan A, is that now, in your opinion, now dead as a standalone on its own situation?
I think as a standalone option, yes, it is, because we've twice been turned down. And as a sovereign people, we cannot continue to accept somebody else telling us that we can't decide our constitutional future. We want cooperation. We want to be able to talk to Westminster about it. We want to be able to have the discussion. We want to have a full and open and frank discussion about what it means to be an independent country. And I'm up for all of those things. I think that we will win that discussion this time round. And I won't go into the details as to why I think we'll win just now, but I think we will win that discussion. But we cannot be held to ransom by a government which we have consistently rejected in every election since 2015. And it is unconstitutional, it is undemocratic, it is against the UN Charter that the people of Scotland do not get to make that decision because of a misnomer and a belief that we have to have a section. We don't legally have to have a Section 30 at all. I get why the SNP want to do it, and I would stand by their decision to want to go with it, but we have to have something on the other side of it if we continue to get the intransigence that we're getting from Westminster right now.
Last question from me. Your timescale seems to be the conference, get the resolution passed as best can be achieved, and then you're heading into next year in the May election. There are clear signs. Mike Russell was in an article today saying that the amount of power grab that's coming up is a nightmare. How does that interfere with your timescale? I mean, my personal belief is that if we could get all the parties, SNP's kicking it off, all the parties to agree to a common stance before the end of this year, helps prevent those powers being, it won't stop it, but it muddies the water as far as any power grab goes.
It doesn't. It doesn't muddy the water, and it doesn't prevent anything, because we're devolved. And power devolved is power retained. So there is not a thing that we can do about it until we take the final decision to be independent. So we can argue for more powers. We've got Kate Forbes asking for the powers to borrow. None of it is relevant if we suddenly hit an intransigent Westminster government who decide to say, you know what, they can shut the Parliament down if they want. That's what devolution is. It was never about having control. It was about a piecemeal, give the Scots something to quieten them down. And if Cameron could have gotten out of going ahead with the Sections 30, he would have done it. If Blair could have gotten out of actually setting up the plans from the Constitutional Convention, he would have done it. It's all of these things. Everything that we have in devolution at the moment means absolutely hee-haw if you've got a UK government who are very strong down in England, because they can take back the powers at any given time. And we can jump up and down as much as we like. We are 5 million or 5.5 million in a population of 65. It doesn't matter a jot. And that's what devolution means. So we have to just accept that we are a devolved parliament at the moment. We're taking back the constitutional affairs of the country on the sovereign will of the people of Scotland. We will ask the UK government for the cooperation to get a Section 30. If they refuse it, we will go ahead with a referendum on the will of the sovereign people of Scotland, and if they vote for independence, we will start negotiating our independence from there on in. And that, to me, is the timescale. And it's going to take a bit of boldness from the leadership in the SNP to actually put that in the manifesto. But we cannot just continue to ask for a Section 30 and meekly accept that they're not going to give it and say, well, at some point they're going to have to give in. No, they don't. They don't ever have to give in. They could sit there for the next 100 years. If the Tories won every election between now and 2031, 2041, 2051, and they've got this solid majority of English Tory MPs, they will just continue to say no. And what's worse, the longer we have this discussion, the more powers that they will take away and the harder it will be for us to become independent. There has never been an opportunity like there is now. Do you honestly think that Margaret Thatcher would have said, if the Scots want their independence, all they've got to do is return a majority of MPs to Westminster and they can have it. We won't stand in their way. Do you think she'd have been daft enough to make that decision, that comment right now? Not a hope in hell. So when going back to your Dominic Cummings, you're absolutely right. They are going to try and do everything to squeeze us into a tighter and tighter box. And at some point, we have to say, we're not having this.
Jim, let me
I hope that my position is going to give people enough comfort and something to hold on to that isn't precipitous. It will keep the cautious, soft nose on board and the ones that vote for the SNP on board until such time as we have exhausted every single avenue, and then we say, enough's enough, we're taking control ourselves.
If you pursue what you're doing just now, which I'm quite confident you will, if Chris continues and you start having discussions, if you have contacts, maybe with the higher-ups, with Joanna Cherries, etc., with Mike Russells, how can the ordinary Yes supporter give you support as you go through all of that? Because you'll be pursuing it. Please come back on the programme if that suits, but I'm just thinking more generally, how does the ordinary Yes supporter become aware of what you're achieving, how you're getting on?
The Yes groups need to start talking amongst themselves about what they think. Have they got enough faith that the UK government will grant a Section 30 on a majority of the SNP? If they come to the conclusion that that's what they think will happen, then that's the position that they're going to have to take. I get a definite feeling that there is discontent throughout the entire movement, whether it's the SNP membership or whether it is the Yes movements as a whole. And I like to talk about the whole, and the Yes movement to me is the SNP as well as everybody else. So in your branch meetings, talk about it. Start looking at what the potential plan Bs are. get your CAs to start talking to the SOAC or whoever it is that's in the leadership that will bring forward resolutions. Get it onto the conference platform so that we can discuss it and we can have a debate about it and we can decide which, if any of these plan Bs, Cs or whatever are the ones that we are going to adopt. And if the membership go to the conference and the conference says, no, we're going to stick with the SNP's position, then that'll be up to the membership. But that's what democracy is. It's the same as if we become an independent country and Scotland suddenly votes to have a right-wing Tory government for the next 20 years. That's what independence is. It's about people making those decisions for themselves. They just need to start thinking, is this working? Is this hold steady line working? Is this putting pressure on the Westminster government? Is it working? Are we getting anywhere? How many chances have we had to progress the idea of independence? And how further forward are we on now from 2014? And I think they'll find that we're no further forward in terms of getting independence, but we've got the strongest leadership and group of people in place just now. We've got the strongest polls. We have got a performance through COVID, which is world beaten and world leading. So why in hell would we not do it right now when the time is right? So that all these small groups need to start talking to each other, focusing on one way that they want to get a plan B or a plan C or whatever it is that you want to get on the conference floor, get it agreed so that it's taken up and it's in the manifesto for the election next year. Because I come back to what I said right at the start, the only way we will get independence is through the SNP. And I don't care what anybody else says, they are the political party who are going to drive our move towards independence. And it has to be through them because they have got this absolute machine behind them, and it's what the whole Yes campaign is going to be tapping into.
I've got my fingers kind of crossed. I don't know about the Greens, but ISP, Solidarity, the Alliance, have all said we're in this for independence. That's what we're doing it for. And I'm hoping if they're listening to what you're suggesting, Jim, and we're trying to push this idea of a common stance across all the parties, I'm hoping if they start showing signs before the SNP conference that they're prepared to do it, it leaves the SNP in a peculiar position if they say, we're the only party that's not going to agree to something. I'm not saying that forces their hand, but I'm hoping it puts some pressure on them.
I think that the SNP will have pressure on them anyway. I think that leadership will have pressure on them because they've asked the question twice already and been refused. So, you know, they're intelligent people. You know, they haven't got to the positions that they're in without being very intelligent people. And I don't for 1 second believe that they don't want independence. I believe they want independence. And it really grinds my gears a bit when I see accusations thrown at senior members of the party saying they're too comfy in their seat, they don't want independence at all. And again, I know that that's going to gather me some criticism, but that's okay, I'll take the criticism. These people joined the SNP many, many years ago, and we're talking back when I was a boy, a lot of these people were in the SNP with one driving ambition, and that was to become an independent country. I get that there is a certain amount of caution just now. They've dealt with the machine that is Westminster down the road, and I can understand why they have a certain amount of caution. We're all on the grassroots. We're all outside the offices. We're not hearing the conversations that are going on. So we're itchy and we're determined that we want to push it on. And I genuinely think that politicians, when they hear that they've got the absolute support of the people behind them, and it's not going to be something that is going to box us in for the next 50 years, they'll go for it. And that's why, again, I keep pushing my position. The position that I'm taking is not precipitous. It's gradual enough, but it's also forceful enough to be able to get to the point where we no longer are asking for their permission to hold a referendum. We're going for it regardless. And I think that the party, if they feel that groundswell underneath them, then they'll go for it.
David, sorry, I've hogged Jim's time. Your turn, my friend, and I'll shut up for a while.
Aye. I thought it would be quite interesting to get somebody for the farming community to have a wee chat about a conversation I had when I was on the 500 miles 2 years ago. We come up to Perthshire and we stayed overnight with a tenant farmer. And up to that point, basically, as someone from the Central Belt, I basically thought that farmers were all Tories, and didn't realise that there was a difference between the landowners and the tenant farmers. And I was even more surprised to find out that like 80% of tenant farmers actually support independence. And I was wondering if you could maybe tell us a wee bit your experience with that.
My experience of that is, I got introduced to Richard Lochhead back in late 2012, middle of 2012 at the Royal Highland Shows. John Swinney sent me to meet him because the big thing for me was the Scotland food and drink industry. And Richard had introduced a thing called it was the first national food and drink policy for Scotland, and there had never been one before, so that's how I met Richard Lochhead. And him and I built up quite a good rapport over the years. And he contacted me when the referendum was called and said, will you get involved with this group where there are other farmers who want to talk about independence? So we set up an organisation called Farming for Yes. And one of the biggest issues that we had was every time we put out a post, and it even happens to this day, and I was talking about my gears getting ground earlier on, well, this really grinds my gears. The farming community just now are about to be absolutely decimated by American trade deals, Australian trade deals, New Zealand trade deals, WTO trade deals. The 6 Tory MPs all voted against an amendment that was supposed to protect food standards for food that was produced and brought into this country, and the 6 Tory MPs voted against it. And every time I tweet something about it, put on Facebook about it, or write about it in the press, all I get is, you reap what you sow. Farmers are all Tories anyway. You have got posters all over your fields. And I say, did you not see Farming for Yes in 2014? We were active in every single part of the country. And the point that you made, Dave, is exactly that. That just because you see roadside banners of landowners with Vote Tory or Better Together, that doesn't mean to say that the 10 tenants that live on his land and who farm his land support him. But if your livelihood was dependent on a guy that, if you had a contract farm agreement, for instance, would tell you that you should be supporting Tory, and if you weren't supporting Tory, then maybe you shouldn't be saying anything, would you risk your livelihood for it? Now, you and I may have a visceral desire for independence. Not everybody does. They might quite like to see an independent Scotland, but they're not going to risk losing their farm or falling out with their landlord on the basis of their political views. So they keep their political views to themselves. But my question to the activists in the SNP and in the Yes movement, and I have to say it's predominantly in the Yes movement, how much leverage do you think that we have when the Tories are about to absolutely shaft the industry? And it's not just farmers that will get hurt with that, it's everybody who eats food, so therefore it's all of us. How much leverage do you think we have in persuading them that independence is right for Scotland and it's right for them by telling them, well, you bampot, you vote Tory before, so therefore you can just live with it? And it's not a case of a farmer voted Tory. He's a person who voted Tory, because there are joiners who vote Tory. There are doctors who vote Tory. Do you not want doctors in the country after we're independent? Do you not want joiners? Do you not want lawyers? Every single occupation has got people who will vote Tory in Scotland. There's about 450,000 who regularly vote for the Tories. How are you going to bring them into the Yes camp? How are you going to get them to see that this country of ours, this inclusive country, which we are wanting to bring everybody together in to build a nation that the world's going to look at and say, wow, what a place Scotland is, if every time somebody puts up something to highlight the decimation that's coming from the Tories, we then throw it back in the farmers' faces who may or may not have voted Tory in the first place. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's not a very good strategy, and it's not going to win us any fans.
Yeah.
Part of the farming term, it's part of the silos, which inevitably, I think, Jim, we all live in. You know, I come from North Ayrshire. It's a reasonable farming community. Go to the centre of Glasgow, and the view will be the one you've expressed. They will see farmers as a group who all constitute a no vote. It's not true.
Yeah.
Can I take you on? You have a relatively small holding now, I think, and you're involved in catering. Can I take you into farmers' markets? And I have this thought in my head. Sandra Colbert opens up a stall at the Buchanan Street steps in Glasgow. Stalled just now, obviously, with the COVID and everything else. She's not allowed to, because she hasn't got a market trader's license. She's got to accept donations for maybe badges. She makes wonderful tablet, which she gives away for nothing, and I enjoy it. Is there a way in which the Yes community could get together with farmers' markets so that we start to dispel and dissolve what you're complaining about?
Farmers' markets.
Does that get you back to the landlord watching?
Yeah, no, it's more the volume of coverage that you're going to get, because I don't know if you know this, it was actually myself that started the first farmers market in Scotland 21 years ago. I set it up in Perth. We were in the middle of a real post-BSE crisis where prices had collapsed completely. And my wife and I had gone, the agricultural minister at the time was a guy, Lord Sewell, who said if farmers want to get out of their current crisis, they'll have to market their way out of it. Now, I was shepherding on an estate just outside Perth at the time, and I had this in my head, well, how do you market your way out of it as a farmer? Because you either take your lambs to the livestock market and you sell them through the ring, you sell them direct to the abattoir, or if you're lucky, there's a few local butchers who will buy your lambs and you'll put them at the slaughterhouse and he'll get them directly. But even butchers at that time were disappearing because the strength of supermarkets and the number of small high street butchers that went out of business at that time was phenomenal. So I had it bouncing around in my head. How do you market your way out of trouble? So we took the kids down to France. They were just a pair of wee tots, and one of the things they advertised to the tourists was, come along and meet local farmers at the farmers market. And I walked into this market and went, Eureka, this is it. So I brought the idea back up with me, and we set up the first one in Perth. And now there are 50 or 60 farmers markets throughout the country. But the problem is, it's the same farmers that will go to lots of different farmers markets. And I know a lot of them. And a lot of them are already supporting our belief in independence. The numbers that you would actually get to in order to be able to persuade them would be tiny. But there's no harm in linking up with these farmers markets. Ruth Watson did a very good thing with her Keep Scotland the Brand campaign, because she took that brand to the farmers markets and spoke to the farming community that were there and said, I want independence, but this is about your food and drink industry. And she gave a very good analysis of what it was like to have a food and drink industry that was the priority of a government and a food and drink industry that would be sold in the river in the way the Tories were. But the reality is, independence shouldn't necessarily just be about whether or not you're going to be able to sell more lambs or not. It should be about whether you've got the pride in your own country to be able to think that you've got the ability to run your own affairs. And every single farmer in the country has the pride and belief that they can run their own affairs. Some of them are going to look at it purely from a commercial point of view and say, all of my eggs are sold down into England, so therefore I am not going to risk that. So you have to have the conversation with them and say, well, why would they stop buying it just because we were independent? You've got a world-beating product. The Saltire is a recognised brand which is respected the world over. So why, just because we've decided to control our own government here in Edinburgh, would your consumers in England want to stop eating your eggs? And it's having those conversations, and it's only going to be the farming community that can do that. I mean, it's getting activists out from the city to go and persuade farmers to be independent. They're not going to listen to it. And I've been, banging away at the farming community, writing letters to the press, having open discussions with them. And it's one of these things you just have to trickle away at. But bear in mind, the vast majority of people that are going to vote yes or no aren't going to be farmers. They may be rural constituents. There's a big rural constituency, but that's not the same as saying farmers. But what you do by alienating farmers and calling them all dirty Tories and they should never have voted Tory is you alienate a rural constituency, because the rural constituency know the farmer and they know that he's a nice guy, and all these nasty nationalists are having a go at this guy, and yet all he's doing is trying to produce good quality food. This is a disgrace. So you can see that the alienation to the farmer is actually alienating the entire rural constituency. And we need that rural constituency to want to come with us.
Ruth Watson was on the show on Saturday. There was an extended show, and Dave and I have talked about having Ruth on at some stage, maybe not for a while. But from everything you've just said, Jim, that would seem to be the natural bridge between the Yes movement and the farming community, is to uphold the quality of what Scottish farmers are producing. In Scotland, the brand is the way to do that.
Absolutely. A farmer wants to make money, but he wants to feel proud of what he's done. When he looks out on his crop, he wants to know that that crop is looking good. When he takes his lambs to the market, when he walks into that market, he's walking 10 foot tall because his heart and soul has gone into producing that product. He won't necessarily be too fussed about politics, and he will vote Tory because he's already voted Tory. He's yet to be persuaded, because he needs people like me and people like friends that I have in the borders and people like Ruth Watson to go and speak to them, get the abuse out of this campaign and talk to them as though they're human beings who have the ability to change their mind and come into our camp. Because you're never going to win a referendum on independence by telling people you're not welcome in our country anymore because you voted Tory in the past. It's mental. It just doesn't.
How much are farmers affected by the future trade deal with the US that's being discussed at the moment?
Well, let me put it to you like this. There was a campaign or a petition set up to try to force the UK government into putting in law that the food standards in this country wouldn't be lowered. And that petition has reached over 1 million signatures. If the UK decides to go down a trade deal route with America, America has already said that what they will require for that trade deal is no tariffs or very low tariffs, no labelling, and free access to our food market, because it is a huge market. Now, what they're giving in return is that we'll get access to their market to sell them lamb and beef and all the rest of it. And you'll get guys like John Lamont going on and saying, even the National Sheep Association said that this is a good thing. But that quote that John Lamont took from the NSA was completely taken out of context, and he missed out everything else that was said in it. We will possibly be able to sell lamb into the US, but it's still going to be a tiny proportion of what we produce in this country. The vast majority of our exports still go to the EU. And again, there is the argument, oh, well, we sell so much more into England. But just because Scotland was an independent country, why would they not want to buy our products in England in the first place? We have the opportunity to absolutely create new trade deals. But when you're trying to create a trade deal with 3 of the biggest agricultural producing countries in the world, in Australia and America, South America, New Zealand, all of these countries who want to sell us food, and we want to sell them life sciences, biochemicals, financial services, what do you think is going to get sacrificed?
Yeah.
And Liz Truss has just put it on that she will set up a commission to look at how we protect food standards. And the NFU and the NFUS in Scotland are all saying this is a great win. It's not. What it is a delaying tactic for Liz Truss, because the commission that they've set up is advisory, it is time limited, and it has no legal bearing whatsoever. So they can say, yeah, we've listened to your concerns. However, the trade deal will still go ahead. We'll have very small tariffs because we need to be able to sell America life sciences or financial services, whatever. And they will absolutely sell the farming community down the river, because they don't have to have that constituency to keep them in power. And it's far more important for them to look after big business than it is to look after a family farm.
Yeah, it's the financial services is a perfect example. Now that they've lost any chance of putting them into Europe, the only place they can go now is America. So yeah, everybody else will get the throats cut.
Yeah.
The other thing that's happening just now, and I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but apparently lawyers across the UK are inviting people who have been affected by COVID-19, talking about trade deals with the UK, to start looking at what's called the investor-state dispute settlement arrangements. These are the secret courts where someone who says, I've been affected by a decision made by a government and I'm not happy about it, can seek arbitration in a court where the huge sums of money are involved. There was a huge dispute about this when the EU were trying to negotiate a trade deal, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. The German population, the Dutch population, all across Europe, who began to understand, hang on a minute, we're going to have secret courts where it's arbitration, not our courts, it's secret courts. I'm not going to take you into that in any detail, but keep your eye open for something called the investor state. It's beginning. You'll start seeing it happen. Tons of money involved, and all the outside party has to say, I have been affected. Can I go to arbitration? And there's tons of money which will come out of the government's pocket.
Right.
Very,
well,
very dangerous.
I know nothing about that one, Mike, so I shall definitely keep an interested eye on that one.
Google ISDS, just those letters, ISDS, Investor State Dispute Settlement. And if you think we've got worries,
I've written that down. You know what my nighttime reading is going to be now, don't you?
Dave, I've covered everything I want to cover with this kind gentleman. Jim, thanks so much for being on.
Absolutely,
it's been my pleasure.
This is just our time now. So it's been great talking to you. I really like what you said. I'm going to go and have a bit of a look at this, and I've got people I can talk to, and we'll maybe be able to get this out. I think also we'll try and get some people for Yes groups to come in and have a wee bit of conversation about this one, because it's definitely something that needs to be taken out to the groups as quickly as possible, because times are of the essence at the minute.
Time is of the essence, absolutely.
When the recording is played tomorrow night, Tuesday night, probably about 7 o'clock, just so that everyone else knows this, we've taken an excerpt from the article you produced in the National, Jim.
Yep.
And we'll attach that at the end of the recording so that there's a clear, we did it with Chris McElhenney, we picked his resolution and we posted it on. There'll be an extract from the piece you did in the National, the second one, which will be attached to the recording so that people are able to listen to me talking too much, you speaking intelligently, Dave being the candy he always talks about. There'll then be a written, simple bit where you have the final say in everything. Jim, thanks very much.
I would just say that people have been missing that there is a slight nuance in this, that some people are saying this is just, well, why not just declare it as a referendum then? There is a very subtle difference. It's a tiny step in the manifesto, but it is a massive step. It's a massive step in terms of where we are as a sovereign people to be able to decide our own constitutional affairs.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Brilliant.
Guys, listen, it has been my absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thanks, Jim. It's been great talking to you. Cheers.
Anytime you want to come back on, Jim, our pleasure.
I certainly will. Thanks very much, guys.
Cheers.